I'm John McKee, editor of Messianic Apologetics, messianicapologetics.net. And I would like to welcome you to this episode of Messianic Insider, your theology and news roundup for February the 19th, 2026. We have a jam-packed episode today, both between our theology roundup and our news roundup. There's a lot which we have to talk about as we are presently going through our approaching one law controversies series. We're moving beyond the Pentateuchal passages, which use the terminology one law or one statute. We're now moving into what does all this mean? And specifically, as we evaluate different theological ideologies, once you've examined what Torah passages employing one law or one statute mean, and you recognize that, well, the one Torah submovement, one law submovement hasn't really done its job in adequately examining them. Still, they communicate important things regarding the character of God and the jurisprudence of the Torah or Pentateuch. And so we're going to be getting into that because, as I've stressed from the beginning, while I do believe that one law theology has misinterpreted and misapplied the different passages which speak of one law or one statute, it doesn't often read them in context. You still have to tally those together, and you still have to recognize that for ancient Israel, while native and sojourner were not exactly the same, they did have far more in common than not. And that is what we have to focus on as today's Messianic community. In fact, that's what you have to focus on as believers. You always focus on what you agree on first, and then you can hopefully sort through in a respectful and constructive way various differences. I know this study hasn't been easy for some of you. And I know some people have decided, look, I don't want to follow Messianic apologetics anymore if they don't affirm that they are one law. Okay. And if you're unwilling to re-examine some of your beliefs, okay. But this article, which we've been going through, approaching one law controversies, this has been on our website for quite a while, like many years. So I hope that is evidence to the fact that we have never told anybody to leave the Messianic community, non-Jewish believers to stop participating in Shabbat or the festivals or a kosher style of diet. I'm a non-Jewish believer who's been in the Messianic community for over 30 years, and we've been doing this. But we have consistently said, which is something I believe that one law theology and the one law ideology, more than anything else, is just impotent to do. We have told people to check their attitudes and to not be judgmental or condemnatory. And we got some very interesting things to talk about at the very end of our live stream today, as I mentioned yesterday. But let's get into the theology roundup. Go to the Messianic Apologetics website, click on articles, scroll down to the letter O, and here you can see the article, Approaching One Law Controversies, Sorting Through the Legalism. And this is where we left off yesterday. Similarities between the native and sojourner in ancient Israel. So we've gone through the different passages which use one law or one statute. I have concluded that they speak of restrictive instruction where the sojourner in ancient Israel could have been taken advantage of, and it's not one law, uppercase L, it's one law, lowercase l. Laws being used as akin to small I instruction or small d direction. It's restricted to specific areas of legislation, where sojourner who came in could have been taken advantage of over against a native. But you still have to tally those together. And likewise, you have to fairly recognize from the Torah, as we're going to do in just a moment, that the native and sojourner in ancient Israel had more in common than not. And there are plenty of people who are disfavorable to a one law theology, Hagism, that sort of thing. But they'll still recognize, yeah, native and sojourner had far more in common than not. And that's what we need to focus on. Not a problem. What principles are communicated by the different Torah passages which employ the terms one law or one statute? They are important for Bible readers to be aware of as a matter of Torah jurisprudence for the community of ancient Israel, particularly as it regards the fair treatment of the ger or sojourner. So these are the passages we've gone through in our study. Eating of the Passover lamb, and thus being considered a native of the land, required either the native born of Israel or a sojourner to be circumcised, as Torah echat applied to both. This meant that a native born of Israel, uncircumcised, may not eat the Passover, as much as an uncircumcised sojourner may not eat. The key issue, though, was the full remembrance of the Passover and not circumcision. Exodus 12, 48, and 49. I'm going to point out to you right here, Torah echat, one law. Many people have taken that to be capital T Torah, speaking of universal Torah, universal Pentateuch, the 5 books. I and many others would say, no, Torah is there used as small t Torah, small l law. It's speaking of specific instruction, specific direction, and making that shift, particularly as it is affected by other uses of the same or similar terminology, is very difficult for people, especially those who have been spun, or do I dare say manipulated, by internet memes, which are just quoting little snippets and not going into the kind of more detailed examination we've had. Okay. The terminology Torah echat can be used to describe a considerable overlap of Pentateuchal instructions, such as those regulating the guilt offering and sin offering, Leviticus 7:7. Whether it be capital punishment for blasphemy or the same instructions for repayment of damages, Mishpat echad applied to the native and sojourner in Israel, Leviticus 24:22, as opposed to the common ancient Near Eastern occurrence when natives and strangers in a society would be held to 2 different standards, with also the presence of different levels of natives, such as the monarchy or ruling or commoner / peasant class. So, okay, the same statute or hukah echat was to be followed whether a native or sojourner kept the Passover or failed to observe the Passover, Numbers 9:14. When burnt offerings, cereal or grain offerings, or drink offerings were made before the Lord, the same standard of measurement was to be held, because hukah echat was to be followed by the native or sojourner who made the offering, Numbers 15, 15, and 16. And the last one, the same law, and you see that's lowercase l law, so it's restrictive instruction, or Torah echat, applied when a sacrifice for unintentional sin needed to be offered for either the native or sojourner in Israel, with the severe penalty of karat looming for intentional sin, Numbers 15, 29 to 30. Such unintentional sin, though, regarded adherence to all of the instructions delivered via Moses to the general population, Numbers 15, 22, and 23. All right, now, many of us have witnessed the terminology of one law or one statute thrown around a bit too much without enough careful thought or attention to what these passages meant in context for ancient Israel. From a standpoint of Torah jurisprudence, each of these Pentateuchal passages are certainly supportive of an ethos where both the Ezrach or native and Ger or sojourner in ancient Israel were to be treated fair and equally before God's law. Different Torah passages where one law or one statute, and again, we're speaking of lowercase l law here, not universal Torah, although we are going to be getting into that later on, that matter. Different Torah passages where one law or one statute was to be demonstrated to those within ancient Israel certainly ran subversive to other ancient Near Eastern law codes, where a double or triple or quadruple standard was more likely to be present among different sectors of a population. So, for example, I already mentioned in the ancient Near East, the ruling class, the aristocracy, certainly a monarchy, they'd be held to a completely different standard than commoners, slaves, etc., right? So here you have, with a stress on one law, that's lowercase l law, manifested in specific instances, a stress on fairness rather than two radically different standards. However, has one law theology adequately accounted for some differences? Knowing that societies contemporary to ancient Israel would not have held both their natives and resident aliens or immigrants to the same basic code of conduct is most serious for how these Torah passages affected later codes of civil justice. Considering the widespread influence of these passages, not only in the course of human history, but also salvation history, Jacob Milgram's thought, quote, "It applies only to the case given in context. It is not to be taken as a generalization," unquote, is surely limiting of these verses' overall philosophical significance. While there were going to be some differences in ancient Israel between those who were natives or sojourners within the community and other internal differences, one should not think that the differences were as stark or drastic as various Jewish interpreters may have wanted them to be. From a standpoint of jurisprudence, the tenor of the different passages emphasizing one law or one statute, and again, that's lowercase law, so it's restricted to a specific case, but still, it is not to draw readers' attention to rigid distinctions between people or groups or subgroups within ancient Israel, but rather the commonality among them. Proponents of a one law or one Torah theology, however, tend to widely advocate that the native and sojourner in ancient Israel were exactly the same, with no differences, something completely unsustainable from the text of the Torah. And so we have to navigate some of these extremes. Well, it's only, uniform instruction in these specific instances, or it's native and sojourner are virtually identical. No, we've got to navigate the fact that native and sojourner had more in common than not, but they did have various differences and distinctions. They weren't nearly 100% the same. And one law or one Torah theology is guilty of promoting near exactness. Torah readers should not draw the conclusion that the native Israelite and Ger or sojourner were exactly the same. Although the native Israelite and sojourner had far more in common than not. R.J.D. Nauf astutely observes in the Dictionary of the Old Testament Pentateuch how, quote, "The resident alien in Pentateuchal law would seem generally to be envisioned to be subject to Israelite law, just as a native Israelite would be. One gains the distinct general impression that resident aliens were envisioned as being accorded equal treatment by the law, Leviticus 19, 33 and 34, Deuteronomy 24, 14 and 15, 17 through 18, with only a few exceptions," unquote. A similar conclusion can be witnessed in other theological reference sources. In the entry for Sojourner in the Anchor Bible Dictionary, John R. Spencer says, for example, often these foreigners are subject to the same laws as the Israelites, Exodus 12:49, Numbers 15:16. Only occasionally is there a law which makes a distinction between Israelite and sojourner, Deuteronomy 14:21, unquote. So, in a lot of theology, examiners are willing to recognize that in a general sense, there was commonality in ancient Israel between native and sojourner, but there were various differences and distinctions, okay? So you can't say that native and sojourner are practically identical, as one law or one Torah theology falsely concludes. The Torah includes a number of important places which demonstrate a considerable degree of commonality between the Ezrach or native and Ger or sojourner within ancient Israel, which did concern the sojourner's adherence to Moses' teaching. So, both native and sojourner in ancient Israel were to keep the Sabbath. But the seventh day is a Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male or your female servant, or your cattle, or your sojourner who stays with you. Exodus 20, verse 10, New American Standard, also Deuteronomy 5:14. And please recognize we're dealing with the native and sojourner in ancient Israel. Later on in our study, probably by next week, we'll get into non-Jewish believers and Jewish believers in today's Messianic community, okay? Because we are obviously, depending on how you date the Exodus, a minimum of 3,300 years on the other side of this instruction. And there's a lot of history we've got to go through, or one has to sort through, namely the Messiah event. And of course, what's happening today via the advent of the modern Messianic Jewish movement. All right. Both native and sojourner in ancient Israel deserved a fair trial. Then I charged your judges at that time, saying, hear the cases between your fellow countrymen and judge righteously between a man and his fellow countrymen or the alien who is with him. Deuteronomy 1:16, New American Standard. Both native and sojourner in ancient Israel had access to cities of refuge. These 6 cities shall be for refuge for the sons of Israel and for the alien and for the sojourner among them, that anyone who kills a person unintentionally may flee there. Numbers 35:15, New American Standard. Both native and sojourner in ancient Israel were to observe the Day of Atonement. This shall be a permanent statute for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall humble your souls and not do any work, whether the native or the alien who sojourns among you. Leviticus 16:29, New American Standard. Both native and sojourner in ancient Israel were to follow the same purification rites after eating meat from an animal which died of natural causes. When any person eats an animal which dies or is torn by beasts, whether he is a native or an alien, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and remain unclean until evening. Then he will become clean. Leviticus 17:15, New American Standard. Both native and sojourner in ancient Israel were to adhere to a most serious sexual purity. But as for you, you are to keep my statutes and my judgments, and shall not do any of these abominations, neither the native nor the alien who sojourns among you. Leviticus 18:26, New American Standard. Okay, this is a very important one. Everyone in the community of ancient Israel, from the men and women to the children to the sojourner, was to hear and follow Moses' teaching. When all Israel comes to appear before the Lord your God at the place which he will choose, you shall read this law in front of all Israel in their hearing. Assemble the people, the men and the women and the children and the alien who is in your town, so that they may hear and learn and fear the Lord your God, and be careful to observe all the words of this law. Kol divrei haTorah hazot. Deuteronomy 31, 11 and 12, New American Standard. And what makes that so important is that universal education in the Torah and its instruction was admonished of all groups within ancient Israel. Native Israelite, male and female, sojourner. So everyone had to have universal Torah education, and no one was being actively discouraged from keeping Moses' teaching. Okay? These are inclusive institutions. They're not trying to exclude other people. The sojourner in ancient Israel was to actually be treated by the native born as though he were native born. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Leviticus 19, 33 and 34, New American Standard. So here we have that when a sojourner came into the community of ancient Israel, they were to be welcomed, given the Israelites' own experience of having been in Egypt. Israel was to be an inclusive community, not actively keep people away and turn people away. And one of the things which can, although, excuse me, go overlooked in this discussion, we may, after we finish this actual study, we may have to get into this some more because I do have some material written about it. One of the things which is often not probed enough, and this comes from trying to read the scriptures in an original context first, is that sojourners who entered into the community of ancient Israel were often very poor. They were often almost destitute. They were a vulnerable class of people, listed along with the widow, the orphan, the sojourner. They were among those who were permitted to glean from the field. And sometimes that doesn't get factored in terms of why there are some differences between native and sojourner in ancient Israel. Being granted the ability to eat an animal that had died of natural causes. That was a form of welfare for sojourners in ancient Israel, no different than being permitted to glean from the corners of a field. The low economic status of many sojourners affected why they are different in some places from the natives. That doesn't get enough traction. All right, let's wrap this up. And I want you to look very carefully at the screen here. There was not an exactness between the ger or sojourner and Ezrach or native, as supporters of a one law or one Torah theology tend to frequently conclude. But there was a common equivalence for these groups within ancient Israel. If we were to employ mathematical symbols, the ger/sojourner does not equal Ezrach or native. Some of you all remember this symbol, the equal sign with a slash through it. But the ger or sojourner, and then we have the squiggly equal marks, Ezrach or native. Okay, that's not the equal sign, but that is an approximate sign. Okay, so some of you all remember from math, the equal sign. So if we were to say a man equals a woman, we'd say, no, 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 that's not the case. There are differences between a man and a woman. Their reproductive anatomy, for sure. Yet, if we were to say a man, squiggly equal sign, a woman, a man approximate a woman approximate a man, we'd say, okay, that's trying to stress common humanity. But there are still some differences. But man and a woman have far more in common as human beings than not. They have the same amount of brain power. The same amount of creativity. They have the same amount of ability to contribute to society, these sorts of things. But a man cannot give birth, and a woman does not have, certain. Anyway, you all get the idea here. Excuse me. If we were to employ mathematical symbols, the Ger Sojourner does not equal the Ezrock or native, but the Ger Sojourner approximates the Ezrock or native. Now listen carefully, please. But while it may be witnessed that the native and sojourner in ancient Israel had a great deal of commonality as co-members of the community, the Ger sojourner entering into the community could never totally be the same as the Ezrock or native. Only a native born of Israel could legitimately claim the story of the Exodus and wilderness journey, not just as a part of his or her spiritual heritage, but also his or her ethnic and cultural heritage. And even though it is most obvious, the native who was raised in a culture and environment of Torah adherence his entire life had definite advantages over a sojourner who entered into the community of ancient Israel in later life. Okay? Now, unfortunately, and this is one of the contributing factors as to why there is a one law or one Torah sub-movement now. Unfortunately, in some, and I don't want to speak universally, in some Messianic Jewish quarters, there can be an overemphasis on distinctions, an overemphasis on differences. And while, somebody like me coming into the Messianic community would say, well, of course, we're not all the same. There have been, when I look at Jewish people doing outward things of Torah, especially, it's like, yeah, this isn't just their spiritual heritage. This is their heritage going all the way back to Mount Sinai and before that. Now, while we are part of the same body of Messiah, we're all part of the same kingdom of God. This is pretty much only part of my spiritual heritage. I have my own ethnic and cultural heritage going back to the British Isles, going back to Western Europe, some of which, unfortunately, has had to see elements of paganism purged from it. But I can't act as though I am 100% the same as an ethnic Jewish person or an ethnic descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I can't do that. Although we do have the same spiritual story. And unfortunately, because you got to remember, in the Messianic Jewish movement, which got started mainly to emphasize that Jewish believers in Yeshua did not have to stop being Jewish and assimilate into a non-Jewish Christianity. In the important effort to reclaim that, some have gone overboard in emphasizing differences and distinctions rather than elements of common faith. But there are definitely Messianic Jewish believers. I count them among my close friends. They are more than happy to emphasize elements of common faith, one new man, one new humanity. Of course, I'm Jewish, and I can claim this as my heritage going all the way back to Mount Sinai. I see a lot of non-Jewish believers participating in this alongside me, wanting to, really grab a hold of their faith heritage in Israel's scriptures. And we know we're not all the same, but we have that common shared hope of faith and salvation in the one God of Israel, his Messiah, Yeshua, and we're co-laboring in the salvation of Israel and the Jewish people together. That's a part of the Messianic community I'm affiliated with, I'm active with. But many others, that's not what their vision of the Messianic community is. So, all right, so this study is cumulative, as you all know. We still have a number of parts to go through next week. Now, tomorrow we're going to be continuing with Ger and Proselutos, who should be submitted to Moses' teaching. Because one of the claims regarding these different passages is that the Ger in what we've just examined was not a sojourner, but was actually some kind of a proselyte. And we're going to be getting into some of that. It's a little technical, but the long and short of it is that proselutos at one point in the development of the Greek language did not actually mean a formal proselyte to a religion or a formal proselyte to Judaism. It just meant a sojourner. And it should not be difficult to recognize that whether it's Hebrew, whether it's Greek, English even, certain terms mean certain things across a spectrum of time. I hate to use this as an example. 50 years ago in the English language, the term gay meant something which it does not mean today. All right. So it should not be difficult to process how the term proselytos at one point in common Greek usage meant one thing, and then later on it would mean something else. Okay, so but this is going to be a little technical, a little longer, but it is an important part of the discussion. And please, if you all want to go ahead, just go ahead and go to the article section of Messianic Apologetics and read the whole article, Approaching One Law Controversies. If you are rushing off to the conclusion that I am telling non-Jewish believers to stop doing outward things of Torah, go read to the end of the article, please, because I'm not. What I'm saying is that focusing on passages, one law, one statute, is decisively the wrong way to do it. Later on in this discussion, we're going to get into the new covenant, supernaturally writing the law in the heart and mind. We're going to getting into the prophecies of the nations streaming to Zion, and we'll probably address those prophecies in greater detail after this study. That's occurring in our day, and we are genuinely seeing people, non-Jewish believers, by prophecy taking place and being supernaturally stimulated as they progress in holiness in the new covenant to participate in outward things of Torah. Okay, that is a reality on the ground. But unfortunately, many of them, too many people think, well, it's one law, one Torah, and they don't understand that one of the reasons why one law, one Torah has got so much legalism associated with it is because those passages which stress things which have been affected by the post-resurrection era in which we live. Okay, but please just go ahead and read the whole article. Not telling anybody to leave the Messianic community, go back to church. That is not true. If I believed that, I would have been the first person to go back to evangelicalism, I can assure you. All right, let's move on to our news roundup. Okay, so we go through the news roundup after the theology roundup because the news is, of course, time sensitive. It changes from day to day. We all know this. Right now, we got a lot of news to go through. The building situation in Iran. We've got the Board of Peace, President Trump's Board of Peace met in Washington today. A lot of discussion about that. During the middle of the night, this is the big one. During the middle of the night, of course, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, former Prince Andrew, was arrested. And this is the biggest royal scandal in 400 years since the arrest of Charles I. I think this is probably going to be even bigger than the abdication of Edward VIII. But anyway, we're going to get into that just a little bit. And I want to stress that, yes, this is a member of the royal family, but there are plenty of people who are not of royalty, not of aristocracy, who have done bad things too. All right. Presidents, prime ministers, executives, celebrities, athletes, whatever. So yeah, we got a lot of interesting news to go through, and then a really exciting thing or spicy thing to talk about at the end of our live stream. Okay. Here's an important story which passed across. Okay. Number one, please be praying for peace. Israel, Gaza, the Middle East, the impending Iranian situation, because I think there's a growing consensus right now that within the next week or 2 weeks, we're likely to see some kind of action. Number two, be praying for peace, Russia and Ukraine. And number three, reason and sanity to prevail here on the American home front in the Western Hemisphere. All the stories I'm about to go through, you'll be able to look at these later today when this episode is archived at Messianic Apologetics So you can go read the articles, watch the different clips in their entirety, etc. Okay? All right, our first story. This is from Jewish Voice Ministries. It seems that a lot are having to clarify some things. Is the Star of David the Star of Remphan? I'm very glad to see some Messianic Jewish organizations, step up to do this. The Star of David is not the Star of Remphan, despite what anti-Semitic comments claim by quoting Acts 7:43. Indeed, the Star of Remphan is actually Saturn. It is an astronomical star, not a symbol. The Magen David has no connection to that idolatrous symbol. Rather, it has been embraced for centuries as a sign of Jewish identity, unity, and God's covenant faithfulness. Now, in their estimation, the Star of David, Magen David, has become a profound banner for the Jewish people, often linked to the shape of King David's shield or armor. Even more beautifully, many see in its 6 points the shape of the lily Shoshana, a flower mentioned throughout Scripture, like in Song of Solomon, representing beauty and belovedness. Now, do I think that what has become known as the Star of David was actually used on David's armor? No. However, it is absolutely true that various geometric shapes, you go to the Holy Land today, decorated synagogues, religious buildings, whether it was a 6-pointed star, 5-pointed star, square, circle, what have you. And so it's because of that kind of decoration. That kind of decoration became very quickly associated with the Jewish community. When the Jewish community later needed a more of a non-religious symbol to identify with, something different than the menorah, the candelabra, the Star of David was chosen. Okay, so the Star of David has had a long history going back to Second Temple times, being associated with the Jewish people. Not the Star of King David, but it does represent Jewish national identity. And unfortunately, a lot of people who are like, it's the Star of Remphan. Many of them are not willing to give the symbol of the cross the same kind of treatment as they give the Star of David, because nobody denies that a 6-pointed star, 5-pointed star, circles, squares, written language, it's all been used in occultic activity at some point or another. Another symbol which has been used in occultic activity is the symbol of the cross, whether it's a T-shaped cross, X-shaped cross, whatever. These people almost never give the cross the same kind of treatment because, by their same standard, it's pagan as well. Every single symbol has been used at some point or another to do nefarious things. All right. I mean, and one of the great ironies is that one of the symbols you'll see decorate synagogues, churches from time to time, is the swastika, right? And you're like, what in the world is this? There's a swastika decorating this church. Because, of course, later on, we know that the swastika was adopted by the Nazi Party. What did I say before we started the news roundup? Different terms in different languages. It means one thing at this point of development, means something completely different at another point of development. 50 years ago, a term like, I'll repeat it again, a term like gay meant something a little different than it means now. There's a video which you can which will come up on social media from time to time, and it's of William Shatner, and he's singing a song on a television program, and he says, "Keep it gay, keep it gay, keep it gay," and it meant something completely different I think it was in the early 70s he did that, than it means now. Okay, and we just have to remember that. All right. From 2C TV, posted yesterday, the 18th of February. Okay, here we go. And there's a 1-minute, 32-second clip. 4 additional US F-15s are en route to the Middle East with tanker support, adding to what's now one of the largest American mobilizations in the region since the Iraq War. Roughly a third of the U.S. Navy is positioned near Iranian waters. Okay. This is the kind of stuff we absolutely have to be paying attention to right now. We don't want to be presumptuous. We don't want to come to conclusions we are going to have to then backtrack on. But there is this buildup. U.S. military forces in the region. Of course, right now, a lot of people I know, they are trying to track the current movements of the Gerald Ford strike group. I do have to correct myself. I've been saying task group or task force for a long time. It's strike group. I was corrected. But that is apparently on the way to Israel right now, right off the coast. It's in the Mediterranean. Yeah, this is huge, what's happening. And they're not going there to just take in the good weather. They're not going there to just be on a, vacation or some kind of training exercise. Our forces are being positioned in the event that the president says it's time to go. So, all right, from Breitbart yesterday, let's shift gears to the American home front. Epstein Files reveals Ghislaine Maxwell's central role in setting up Clinton Global Initiative, despite Hillary Clinton saying they had met on a few occasions. Now, of course, we know that there's this ongoing discussion about what are the Clintons going to do going before Congress and testifying about their involvement with this or with that. I know that our attention right now, because of today, is focused on the former Prince Andrew being arrested because of his association with Jeffrey Epstein. But, what about the Clintons? I mean, that's huge for people here in the United States. So we'll just continue to monitor this. And as I've said from the very, very beginning of this whole Epstein matter, regardless of where anyone stands on the political spectrum, the one thing it's going to achieve is people's trust in government, industry, celebrity, whatever it is going to plummet, because everyone has got some kind of dirt, some kind of skeleton in their closet. They were in too many people were involved with this fellow at some point, and it's like, I don't know what to do about this. Our ultimate trust and confidence is in the Creator God. Please do keep that in mind. But really, it's going to be I think it's really going to come down to some of these really big names, people like the former Prince Andrew, of course, Bill Gates, the Clintons. It's going to come down to, that's what we're going to be really, this is really going to get us upset. From Open Source Intel Defender, this is an opinion posted yesterday, 2:36 p.m. The United States is likely to attack Iran eventually, but not necessarily in the coming days, despite the spike in global media noise surrounding the conflict. And then it references the Jerusalem Post. Okay, so that's an opinion. No, I'm not expecting, and this is my personal opinion, though I could be totally surprised by this. I'm not expecting there to be a conflict initiated by the weekend. I still think there are a lot of things which the Trump administration, the Israeli government, they want to see in place. But the pressure is building. There's no doubt about that. Now, along with that, here's an opinion from X on Inside Israel Intel, posted yesterday at 1:49 p.m. According to Barak Ravid, a round of talks with Iran in Geneva was described as a nothing burger by a senior U.S. official speaking to Israeli media. The official's comments suggest a lack of progress in the discussions. Additionally, there are indications that Trump is moving closer to a potential conflict. This is not a surprise to hear that, the opinion at least, that what happened in Geneva, the talks earlier, a nothing burger. The Iranians are just trying to buy time right now. They're trying to figure out what they're going to do. This is the customary Iranian strategy. We've definitely seen this before. Negotiations are used to buy time. All right. Likewise, here's another opinion. I-24 News on X. And this is from 12:19 p.m. yesterday. So I picked this up, obviously, after our stream. U.S. officials tells I-24 News forces weren't deployed just to sit on bases for long weeks. All right. Yeah, I think all of us can logically deduce that this significant buildup, particularly 1/3 or so of the active U.S. Navy being in the region, sorry, it's not there to just, they're not on some pleasure cruise, okay? They're not going there to just catch the sun. They're there to be on site, on position, to go at the order of the president, should it be necessary. From the New York Post, also at this is from yesterday. The headline, Trump ready for sustained strikes on Iran as U.S. military executes unprecedented Middle East buildup. A massive U.S. military buildup in the Middle East suggests the U.S. could be ready to launch a sustained bombing campaign on Iran in weeks or even days, should Tehran continue refusing President Donald Trump's demands in ongoing negotiations. Okay. Now, sustained means, of course, this is going to be big, should it happen. And the forces are just continuing to build and build. And, of course, this headline, sustained bombing campaign on Iran, in weeks or even days. I would expect weeks. And how long does sustained mean? Does it mean a week, several weeks? For certain, what the American people do not want, they don't want another 2003 Iraq war, another Afghanistan. We don't want that. But we're willing for there to be, a decisive strike, series of bombings, special forces. And I think that there is some justification to conclude that if we see the U.S. go in, try to participate in regime change in Iran, we're going to see kind of a repeat of what took place in Venezuela. Of course, it's a different theater of combat. There's no question there. But what we saw in Venezuela is likely to repeat on a larger scale with Iran, should this happen. Okay, from Open Source Intel Defender yesterday at 4:34 p.m. Top national security officials have told President Trump the military is ready for potential strikes on Iran as soon as Saturday, but the timeline for any action is likely to extend beyond this weekend, sources familiar with discussions told CBS News. And then, of course, there's some other things stated there because the president has to juggle multiple balls. And we're going to note one of those balls in a few moments. But the president, Israel is concerned about Iran's nuclear aspirations, their ballistic missiles. They're concerned about regional security. Okay, no problem. The president, yes, the U.S. government, they want regional security as well. But the U.S., we have to juggle, what do you do about Russia? What do you do about China? What do you do about other things? Because even if you take out the Islamic Republic and you see a constitutional monarchy with the exiled crown prince return, you see a democratic republic, and it's got good relations with the West, with the United States, with Israel, and all this, and it's for the Middle East, it's very progressive. There are going to be others who want to fill the gap. What do you do about Turkey now? What do you do about Saudi Arabia? What do you do about, right? So the president is having to sort through all kinds of things beyond just the region. It's like once you throw a rock into a pond or a lake, there's a ripple effect that goes out. All right. And along with this, here's a story from CNN. This is from yesterday. The headline, U.S. military prepared to strike Iran as early as this weekend, but Trump has yet to make a final call, sources say. So you can read through this, skim through this. And indeed, if there is no military activity, and here there's a picture of, a lot of the main U.S. forces and allied forces in the region at present. I personally would not expect there to be major military activity over this weekend. I think that based on what has occurred over the past several days, the start of the week, what took place in Geneva. Likewise, today, the Board of Peace meeting in Washington. The Gerald R. Ford strike group is still on the way. The president still has to consult with different advisors, different intelligence. And look, we as civilians mainly, we're only looking at this open source material. And from that, we're extrapolating, guessing, speculating. We don't have all the information. And I know some people, why doesn't he do it now? Why doesn't he do it now? You don't have all the information. I don't have all the information. And we have to remember that sometimes. Yeah, as I have said multiple times, and in even Bible study and exegesis, and maybe it is because I was trained first in political science and then later got into theology. There are people in the course of theological development. Why didn't they see this? Why didn't they see that? And sometimes you have to remind them, okay, when did they live? And did they have access to this information? You've got access to information people 300 years ago did not have, even though they may have been very godly, very loving. They may not even have been anti-Semitic. They had a heart for the Jewish people, them coming to faith in their Messiah. Yeah, but they didn't understand what we understand about the Dead Sea Scrolls. That's because they didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls. So the same principle of you may not have all the information. It applies to theology. It applies to life. We have to sometimes keep that in mind. And some people, it's pretty obvious. Some people, not so much. All right, from 2C TV, and this is important as we monitor the situation in Iran. This came yesterday at 6:36 p.m. Over the last few hours, the regime has flooded major Iranian cities with armed IRGC forces and military vehicles on nearly every corner. Simultaneously, medical personnel are receiving texts warning them to prepare for a mass casualty situation. And Tusi's remark is, the regime is bracing for impact from abroad and from its own people. And there's a 2-minute, 36-second clip you can watch. So, this is where we have to ask the question, what was the thing in Geneva all about? Just buying time so you could get yourself ready for what you think is possibly just the inevitable. Israel's going to do something. The U.S. is going to do something. There's an insurgency here on our own soil that's going to do something. So with that in mind, the New York Post, yesterday, the 18th of February, here's a headline. Iran's exiled crown prince calls for Trump intervention to expedite the process of tossing regime. Of course, you can go read this all in greater detail, but references demonstration during the Munich Security Conference took place on Saturday. And yes, we're seeing a steady buildup of forces. And here we see Pahlavi has positioned himself as a candidate to lead Iran through a transitional period decades after his father, the former Shah of Iran, was ousted from power during the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The exiled prince has made repeated appeals to the U.S., with Pahlavi praising Trump after the president said a regime change would be the best thing that could happen for Iran. Okay, so the situation continues to build, continue to wait. I don't see it being diffused at this point. Could be wrong. From the Times of Israel, let's have a little discussion about Tucker Carlson. So Tucker Carlson, we know he was detained at Ben Gurion Airport. The headline here is from February the 19th today. Israel U.S. envoy reject Tucker Carlson's claim that he was detained and interrogated at airport. So here you see conservative anti-Israel media personality Tucker Carlson claims that he was detained by Israeli security staff at Ben Gurion Airport after interviewing U.S. Ambassador Mike Huckabee, which Israel and Huckabee firmly deny. And mainly the response back to this is, guess what? almost everyone who travels to and from the modern state of Israel gets taken off to the side, interviewed, interrogated even. What are you doing in the country? What are you planning to do? This is pretty standard procedure. And yeah. All right. So what are some of the balls President Trump is having to juggle right now? Because a lot of people, as I have said, why doesn't he just give the order, go into Iran? Now, of course, a big part is making sure all your forces are strategically positioned, ready to go. You have all these options at your disposal. I mentioned yesterday several times, the president wants to have a maximum flexibility from negotiations to possible military action. But among the balls the president, the United States has to juggle are the geopolitical elements. So from open source intel from 12:12 a.m. this morning, February 19th, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov said that any new U.S. strike on Iran would have serious consequences and called for restraint to find a solution to enable Iran to pursue a peaceful nuclear program. So, what do you do about the Russians, among others? Now, I think it is true that countries like Russia and China, they do not look at Iran, the Islamic Republic, as an ally or even a partner. They look at them more as a servant or a vassal. And ultimately, when it comes right down to it, an expendable one at that. Um, while Russia, China, they're willing to send, some military hardware, some logistical assistance. They're not going to go to war with the United States or a conflict with the United States or the West over Iran. They didn't do it over Venezuela. They're not going to do it over Cuba. Iran's just, an expendable vassal. They're useful for right now, and if necessary, they can be tossed away. But still, that doesn't mean that you're not going to hear some tough speech from a Sergei Lavrov or others. And it doesn't mean that the president doesn't have to, and others don't have to take that into account, because they do. All right, from I-24 News, and this is from today, 12:46 a.m. Report Rubio to meet with Netanyahu as U.S. weighs Iran options. The byline, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will reportedly meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel on February the 28th, as the U.S. reportedly could be ready for Iran strike as soon as this week. Okay, and you can read this and you can see some of the other factors which play into this. Oh, yeah. One of the things, Rubio, who also serves as national security advisor in President Donald Trump's administration. That's one of the reasons why you see all the different memes floating around with Marco Rubio and the different outfits, because he's Secretary of State, national security advisor. He's also apparently the chief archivist, I believe, of the United States. And hey, if he can do all this, why can't he do this and that and everything else? That's where the meme comes from. Now, so where are we going to be in 9 days? That's 9 days from now, February the 28th. Is Marco Rubio going to be going there and we're still waiting to see something happen? Will we have just seen something start? Will we be in the middle of something? Will he even go? This is why I do have to preface every time, because some people don't remember. The news changes from day to day, and the situation today can be very different than the situation tomorrow. So with that stated, okay, the big story today, and I caught this, during the middle of the night. To be honest, I wasn't that surprised, but I've been paying attention to this for a while. People who are not paying attention would be like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe what happened." This is and when I first saw it on X during the middle of the night, because I do wake up like every 2 to 3 hours, and I check things and I go back to sleep. I'm one of those people. I didn't see it from official like news channels, but when I saw it circulate a few times, I'm like, okay, I have to just go right to the top. and make sure that this isn't just rumor or hearsay. So I went to the BBC on Instagram, and surely enough, breaking: Andrew Mountbatten Windsor arrested. And here he has been arrested on suspicion of misconduct in public office. But then, of course, it goes down, talks about Thames Valley Police said they were assessing a complaint over the alleged sharing of confidential material by the former prince with late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. So Epstein is definitely a factor here. And there are going to be some, at least one more post on this. But yeah, this is huge. This is huge. This is the royal family, right? And I know that there are people out there in the Messianic sphere of influence who believe that Prince Charles of Wales, now King Charles III, is the anti-Messiah or antichrist. I'm definitely not in that camp. I think that's absurd. And actually, this kind of scandal, because we know it's deeper than just what the headline says. Anyway, we know it's deeper than just what the headline says. But what it represents is like the world's oldest and most long-standing monarchy. How much more life does it actually have in it? And to just be fair, I'm not alone in this by any means. The British royal family is an endangered species. I mean, nothing lasts forever, right? All right, so Tucker Carlson, here's another response. Here's a response to it from Shadi Khalul, who is an Israeli Christian, interviewed on I-24 News. There's a 6-minute, 2-second clip. My response to Tucker Carlson, I-24 News interview: this guy can't speak lies about our Christian community in Israel and about our country, Israel, the only democracy in the Middle East where we enjoy safety and freedom. So here he specifically says, if Tucker Carlson decides to be an enemy of Israel, spreading Jewish hatred, then he is harming Christians in Israel and the region too. For this reason, Tucker is becoming also an enemy for all persecuted Christians that he is ignoring and their suffering under Arab and Islamic regimes, including the Palestinian Authority. Only in Israel we enjoy freedom and safety. We will defend our state to make sure it continues to prosper and safe for all of us. Okay. So you all can watch that. Yeah, Tucker Carlson's continuing defense of a great deal of what is seen in the Islamic world. And look, we know they're good Muslims, they're bad Muslims. We want to be fair, but specifically claiming that Christians in Israel are persecuted, they are discriminated against, they don't have religious freedom. That's not true. All right, so here's an important headline. This is the New York Post, and I know there are others similar like that. Ex-Prince Andrew becomes first royal in 400 years to be arrested. And here, the description mentions how King Charles I was the last royal to be arrested, but this dates all the way back to the English Civil War in 1647. Charles I was tried and executed in January 1649. So, yes, Prince Andrew being arrested. I mean, this kind of scandal exceeds I think it does at least, it exceeds the level of Edward VIII abdicating for Wallace Warfield Simpson, which was in 1936. And of course, there's a lot of information which has come out since then that Edward VIII was a Nazi sympathizer, to the point where Adolf Hitler promised Edward VIII that he could return to the throne. But yeah, this is probably bigger than that, because the question is, well, because King Charles has issued a decree that no one's above the law. Basically, we got to let this go through the system. But how involved is this? And of course, the Epstein stuff doesn't just involve the royals. It involves presidents, prime ministers, business leaders, industry leaders, entertainers, all the different things which a lot of people think are important to our society. Sin and corruption are sin and corruption. Okay, from Disclosed TV. This is from 8:50 a.m. today, and there's a 2-minute, 8-second clip. This is the Trump and world leaders meet for the Board of Peace inaugural meeting in Washington. Trump saying, it's all about an easy word to say, but a hard word to produce, peace, but we're going to produce it. So expect there to be a lot of commentary, a lot of conclusions drawn regarding this meeting in Washington as it concerns this Board of Peace, which many are concluding is kind of an alternative to, it might become an alternative to the United Nations. Here, Rapid Response 47, there's a 25-second clip. POTUS joins fellow world leaders and founding members of the Board of Peace for a group photo this morning at the Donald J. Trump Institute Board of Peace. And when I first saw this, I got to admit, I didn't recognize many of the leaders from the Middle East or the Arab world because more of them are in business suits than in the traditional robes, which you would see them dressed in were they in the Middle East. For example, you look in the back there, the Prime Minister of Qatar is standing right next to, that's Jared Kushner, but he's standing right next to the Foreign Minister of the State of Israel. But I didn't recognize him because he's in a business suit. So we wait and see what's going to happen from the Board of Peace. Okay, 3 more news stories, and then the little spicy story we've got. Okay, Board of Peace. All right, this is from the New York Post. The headlines, White House warns Iran it'd be very wise to cut a deal now as Tehran teams up with Moscow for naval drills. And of course, we continue to hear reports about a series of naval drills in the critical oil choke point of the Strait of Hormuz and the Gulf of Oman. The Trump administration warning Tehran it'd be very wise to cut a deal now. Yeah, knowing how the president is, particularly as a businessman, he's going to hold out the opportunity for Iran to, hey, cut a deal with us. You know, we just don't want to go in and bomb your country. We want you to come to an arrangement with, we want to come to an arrangement with you. But how sincere, how genuine would the Islamic Republic be with that? So with that in mind, here's a post from Open Source Intel Defender. Actually, 2 posts. The first one, a clip from the Board of Peace, 34 seconds, where the president has said, now is the time for Iran to join us on a path that will complete what we're doing. And if they join us, that'll be great. If they don't join us, that'll be great too. But it'll be a very different path. Okay. And then he goes on and says, bad things will happen if it doesn't. Speaking of not being able to make a deal. And Open Source Intel Defender's comment is, sounds like a final ultimatum toward Iran by President Trump. So, yeah, the pressure is building. The pressure is building. All right. And I saw this headline on my X feed. This is from My Charisma. And hey, there's a lot of people talk about this subject. We file things away when something comes up. And I know that a lot of people don't like Charisma. I've got a kind of a love-hate relationship with it myself. But whether you like it or not, probably more people across the Messianic spectrum read Charisma than any other publication. And Charisma, and at every IMCS Rabbis conference I've gone to, the final evening, Stephen Strang has been there, and then later Jonathan Kahn has given the final presentation. And whether you like Charisma or not, I will have to say this. Stephen Strang has been with the Messianic Jewish community since its reemergence on the scene in the 70s. And Charisma's been there for the Messianic Jewish community. You can't say that for a lot of other groups out there. So we pay attention to when Charisma picks up something like this, and we pass it on as information, and we file it away. Because a big part of what we're doing on Messianic Insider 5 times a week is to just stay up to date with what people are talking about, what people are saying, how does it affect what's going on, how does it affect me, how does it affect our faith community and the Messianic sphere of influence. So What's the headline? Trump poised to release UFO disclosure, the biblical truth about the Genesis 6 deception, which of course immediately ties you into the Nephilim. So here the article starts out by saying, the drumbeat of UFO disclosure is growing louder. What the world is preparing to celebrate as a historic revelation is the unveiling of an ancient lie prophesied in the Word of God. A recent Daily Mail report claims that President Donald Trump may be preparing a major address concerning extraterrestrial life. The report centers on comments by Laura Trump, who said she and her husband questioned the president about rumors of an upcoming announcement. So this is all just talk. It's speculation, and it goes into, mentions 1947 and Roswell and some other things. We have no idea, but we definitely know. And it'll take you about 4 or 5 minutes to read this article, but we know that a lot of people connect the Nephilim of Genesis 6, fallen angels cohabitating with human females, producing a race of giants. Frequently, that is connected to Yeshua's word in Matthew 24. The days before his return will be like the days of Noah. Now, the main parts of that are eating, drinking, marrying, giving in marriage, not paying attention to what's occurring. And they say, look, the modern reappearance of the Nephilim would be in the form of UFO, alien, extraterrestrial, but it's really just demonic. It's the same kind of thing. And I've heard that point of view since 1997 for many, many years. What's going to happen? Hey, I have no clue. But there are definitely high-profile people in the government, military, etc., who have hinted at different extraterrestrial types of things. We do not want to be presumptuous, but we also want to be aware when that kind of a headline is released, so it doesn't catch us completely off guard. And along with that, are more and more frequent conversations and discussions about, and I'm just talking about this hypothetically, I've mentioned it before, there are people out there, conservative evangelical believers, at least hypothetically, they've had to sort through or are sorting through, what if humankind is not the only civilization in the universe? What if God's got some other story playing out? There's even a developing area of theology called exotheology or astrotheology meant to discuss this. And we just need to be aware of it. I'm not saying that there are other civilizations on the other side of the universe, but we do need to be aware of this. And we need to be aware of how this affects people of faith. All right, so our final story, and I did say this was going to be a little spicy. And I mentioned this at the end of our stream yesterday, and it pertained to a live stream from Messiah Matters, a Torah resource, Caleb Haig. Here, I'll just point it out to you here. This is from YouTube. And yesterday, I watched some of it before we went live, and then I watched the rest of it later in the evening, and I slept on it. Okay. And a number of you, when this thing was released, wanted me to take a look at it. And it mainly had to do with how Torah Resource, which is widely regarded as the number one law or one Torah organization, Tim Hegg, of course, all of us at some point or another have, and I'll be fair, we've genuinely benefited from some of his perspectives. I benefited from some of his perspectives on Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews. Certainly more than learning from Bruce Longenecker on Galatians or Hans Dieter Betz on Galatians. So, but, one law, one Torah theology, which we have been discussing and having some disagreements with. Torah Resource is the main one law, one Torah group. And you're probably familiar with them. And, I've benefited from some of their scholarship over the years. I freely admit that. Okay. But I recommend you watch this. You can draw your own conclusion, but this got sent to me yesterday. And, what do you think about this? So I've got some notes regarding this, and I'm going to try to keep my comments, my reaction to this limited to about 10 minutes. All right. So apparently, Torah Resource was able to exhibit at the recent MJAA, Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, Southwestern Regional Conference in Irvine, California. Our ministry actually exhibited at the Southwestern Regional in 2020, right before COVID. My stepfather, Mark Huey, who many of you all know, he works for the Joseph Project. Presently, they're exhibiting right now at the National Religious Broadcasters in Nashville, Tennessee, but he was at the Southwestern Regional. And okay, so Torah Resource was able to have a table, a booth. Okay, no. One of the questions I have regarding that is, how did they get a table or a booth? Because one law, one Torah theology is considered to be a false teaching by Messianic Judaism. If you register, for example, to have a marketplace presence at the National Messiah Conference in Grantham, Pennsylvania, the person in charge of the marketplace will check to see what congregation you go to, who your rabbi is, and if they are a part of the MJAA, you normally will just get let in. It's not a problem. But somebody was asleep at the wheel letting in Torah Resource at the MJAA Southwestern. I'm sorry. Now, watching what Caleb Hegg had to say, and look, I'm a First Amendment believer. He's got the right of free speech, right of free opinion. Because really what it came down to is he was responding to the style of Messianic Judaism he saw at this conference. I don't consider what he had to say to be a hit piece per se. It wasn't on the level of a R.L. Solberg or Rob Solberg, some of the things he does. Yet he did make some remarks which would definitely be considered inflammatory by some of the people I know and am in fellowship with. And a lot of the people I know and in fellowship with would be angered by some of the things he said. I myself am angered by them. I don't know how Torah Resource got a table at the MJAA Southwestern because the Messiah Conference is highly screened. So maybe they needed to fill a space and he got in as a total fluke. I don't want to get into the weeds with some of this because you need to watch this yourself, come to your own conclusion. So I'm going to try to be as diplomatic as I can be. That's why I slept on this. I didn't just respond to it yesterday in our stream. Presently, our series right now, we started it last Monday. Our One Law series should serve as evidence enough to you that our ministry, Outreach Israel Ministries, Messianic Apologetics, is in a different sphere of influence than one law or one Torah. We are not one law, one Torah, okay? We've got different approaches to those passages. We hold to some different theology than they do. We come to some different conclusions. We've got a different emphasis. That should be clear enough. I don't try to overemphasize differences. I certainly don't try to run people off who are non-Jewish, who have embraced different outward things of the Torah, like Shabbat or the festivals, because we're not Jewish and we do it ourselves. As we have grown in holiness, and as I believe we have been fulfilling prophecy like Micah 4:1-3, Isaiah 2:2-4, etc. But it is sad that over the years, our family, our ministry, we have not had a witness of the Spirit with a great many of the one law leaders out there. We've had difficult relationships with them. We've had tensions with them years ago. So this would have been 2005, 2007, 2008. I was an active participant in the Torah Resource discussion list, which I'm sure is now defunct. Definitely a previous chapter of life. And yeah, I had disagreements with Tim Hegg. I had differences of opinion, and some of them were severe enough to later just go on. Okay. And a lot of it had to pertain to he was not curtailing bad attitudes, judgmentalism, condemnation of other people, particularly evangelical believers who were not seeing things along the one law lines. So that was something which it was a learning experience. And yeah, a lot of us have had, we've had incidents with different one law people and some of their spirituality. Locally at my own Messianic congregation, my own Messianic Jewish congregation, our Messianic Jewish rabbi doesn't have a problem at all with non-Jewish believers doing Shabbat, the festivals, the appointed times. And like a lot of Messianic Jewish believers, would genuinely like to see more and more evangelicals embrace these things, especially as we enter into a very dark time when Israel, the Jewish people, the Messianic Jewish community need as many friends and allies as they can get. So I am not in a Messianic Jewish sphere of influence which turns non-Jewish believers away, actively turns them away. If they're a problem, of course, they'll be asked to go on. But no, if you're growing in holiness, the Lord prompts you, this is important, please. We're one new man, we're one in Messiah. That's the Messianic Jewish sphere of influence I'm a part of. And yes, I've had my moments from time to time, but when are you not going to have your moments with a group of human beings? Now, in what Caleb Haig talked about on this Define Messianic Judaism, he did get some of his facts wrong because, he only attended one Southwestern MJAA regional conference. I've been involved in MJAA activities for the last 12 years, so I think I know a little more than he might know. First of all, there's some confusion about what MJAA, Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, is, UMJC, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, is, and most especially IAMCS, International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues. MJAA goes back to the original Hebrew Christian Alliance of America, 1915. And it was in the early 1970s that the transition was made from Hebrew Christian to Messianic Jewish. So Hebrew Christian Alliance of America became Messianic Jewish Alliance of America in the early 1970s. And that's when you started seeing congregations meeting on Saturday. That's when you started saying, we're not just doing the festivals or a kosher style of diet or what have you as a matter of Jewish culture. We're trying to actually honor the covenants with our ancestors. In 1979, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations split off from MJAA. Okay. And that's why, some of its first meetings were held in Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, right in the backyard of Grantham, Pennsylvania, where the Messiah Conference is held. The IAMCS is joined with the MJAA. MJAA is mostly for the individuals affiliating, whereas the IAMCS, International Alliance of Messianic Congregations and Synagogues, that came later as the apparatus whereby MJAA people could be ordained as rabbis, and later Messianic pastors and Messianic teachers. And so one of the things which doesn't get enough publicity about the IMCS, non-Jewish men at least can be ordained as a Messianic pastor or a Messianic teacher. So that's something which needs to be noted. It's not trying to exclude non-Jewish people from serving in Messianic congregations and synagogues. Now, if you'd like to know a little more about the development of MJAA, UMJC, IMCS, and MJAA when it comes to non-Jewish believers, non-Jewish believers are welcome to participate. While you will find some who hold to a bilateral ecclesiology, you'll find others who adhere to a more ambivalent, we're one new man, or we're one in Messiah. Okay, but if you want to know a little more about the development, and I've got a few resources here, you can read Born a Jew, Die a Jew, the story of Martin Chernoff by Johanna Chernoff, his widow. They're both gone now, but this deals from a memoir perspective of the Chernoff family, how they were instrumental in seeing formal Messianic Judaism arise in the 1970s. Likewise, from Paul Lieberman, some of his memoirs, Don't Call Me a Christian, a truly Jewish story. So this deals with his testimony, coming to faith as a Jewish believer in Yeshua, some of the things which led to the formation of Messianic Judaism in the early 1970s, and then the sequel, which came out last year. So you have Don't Call Me Christian, and here you have Call Me Messianic. So it deals with more what you see in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and that does cover the break off of the UMJC from the MJA. So a lot of people don't know that. And look, this is just so you understand where we are today, because things which occurred in the 1960s and the 1970s affect us today. So one of the things about the MJA, it is a broad tent. When you have seen me go to Messiah Conference, the IMCS Rabbis Conference, I've said, there are two main sectors of it. You've got those who are charismatic leaning, and you've got those who are dispensational leaning. Okay, you do see a plurality of approaches on various issues, because guess what? That's Judaism. If you go to a Jewish synagogue, you're going to see a plurality of perspectives on many issues. It's not like, well, we have a church here and we hold to a Calvinistic soteriology, once saved, always saved, or over here we have we hold to an Arminian soteriology. If you blaspheme the Holy Spirit, you can lose your salvation. As I say to my local congregation's new members class, we've got both perspectives represented here and a whole lot of other plural perspectives represented. And that is just like Judaism. If you went to a conservative or Reformed temple, you'd see people from Jewish backgrounds all over the world, all kinds of ideologies represented, and they learn to get along with one another. That is reflected in a lot of what you experience in the MJAA. And if you're not Jewish, you just have to pick up on that over a period of time. So what it means, for example, is that, excuse me, for an Outreach Israel Messianic Apologetics, we exhibit at the Messiah Conference, the largest Messianic conference in the world. We know for a fact that a figure like a Jonathan Cahn is going to not only be attending the conference, but he's going to be in the same marketplace. Okay? And for some people, that's just too much. For others, it's like, look, we're here for us, principally. And, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I'm a Jonathan Cahn skeptic. I believe that a number of the things he comes out with are an exegetical basket case, but he does raise some important, he does have an important moral message, which we have to take seriously. Some people that's not enough, some people that goes too far. Okay. Just a little background in terms of our own family's involvement with MJAA. Many of you all, and please do, if you haven't, I'll just go to it on our website so you can find this. Go to messianicapologetics.net. On the Statement of Faith tab, click on About the Editor. You can read about myself, and that's a really good picture of me from my sister's wedding 2 years ago in my Clan Mackay kilt. So you can scroll down, and here, click on this, My Family's Messianic Experience, 1995 to 2002. So you can read about how we got started in Messianic Judaism 30 years ago. Then we got involved in more independent expressions. And then 13 years ago, we moved back to DFW and rejoined the Messianic Jewish community. But yeah, after having been involved with some of these independent expressions, which, yes, included one law, one Torah for a season, when we moved back here, to Dallas Fort Worth in 2012, going into 2013. We knew we were going to be reaffiliating with Messianic Judaism. By this time in our lives, it was because we just had enough of the legalism, the Toraholatry, the judgmentalism seen in a lot of what would then become Hebrew roots. The choice was either we're going to go to Messianic Judaism and just recalibrate what we need to do. And the Lord actually made that pretty easy for us. Or we're going to return to evangelicalism and do like Shabbat and the festivals on the side, which would, of course, seen them eventually dissipate and disappear. So I'm very grateful for what the MJA has done for me. Now, after 12 years or so of involvement, going to different events, speaking, going to different, gatherings, what have you. And this was very important for us because for a number of years at the start of our ministry, we did not have any group to really affiliate with. We were entirely on our own. After 12 years of involvement, which is more than just attending one regional conference, okay? We see, for example, my stepfather, Mark Huey, works for the Joseph Project as a fundraiser, talks to Joel Chernoff on the phone several times a week. I've had people like Joel Chernoff, Paul Lieberman in my house. They've had my own smoked brisket, okay? So I know these people. We see one another at these events, at these gatherings. We're on a first name basis. And it's been good to understand their perspective of the Messianic movement and its development. And I appreciate the plurality of the MJAA on some of these matters because it gives our family a place. If it weren't for some of that plurality, we might have, out of frustration, said, I'm glad that there's a Messianic Jewish movement, but it's just not that compatible with our family and what our needs are. Let's just go back to evangelicalism and we'll be enriched and we'll attend a Messianic congregation, once in a while and for the holidays and that sort of thing. So MJA was definitely a godsend to us. Now, one of the things what I detected from, we're going to go over 10 minutes, I'm sorry, from Caleb Haig's Which Messianic Judaism? Define Messianic Judaism. That was his title. He mainly was reacting to what he saw at that conference, and I wasn't there, so I don't know, but specifically what he saw, but I can deduce. He mainly reacted to what he witnessed as Torah light, a Torah light approach that is seen in much of the MJAA. Now, he was also in Southern California. My MJA experience has been in the Southeast. It's going to the Southeastern Regional in Orlando a few years. It's been in Texas, and it's been going to Pennsylvania. And certainly in the Southeast and in Texas is a little more conservative. What I've seen in Pennsylvania is kind of a toss-up because, again, the Jewish community is a plurality. So, yeah, you've got Messianic Jews who they were raised in, for example, Reform environments. They never were raised with, in Reform Judaism, they were never raised with keeping kosher. So they still don't keep kosher, or they might keep a form of kosher at home and eat treif out in the world. Those are the kinds of things which don't get discussed enough. The fact that many Messianic Jews were raised in Reform Jewish homes and, doing Shabbat or the festivals, it's a part of Jewish culture. It's important to them. But in terms of their own faith in Yeshua, that's the most important thing. And they, might think that they're more remembering Shabbat, the appointed times, a kosher style diet, circumcising their sons on the 8th day. It's important, but it doesn't exceed faith in Yeshua. So Caleb Haig, his main conclusion, and this is something which is going to get people upset. He mainly draws the conclusion, again, he attended one conference. I've been attending conferences for years, and I've gotten to know these people for years. He draws the conclusion that the MJAA is not actually Messianic Jewish, but is instead charismatic Christian with a Jewish outreach. Okay, and he's welcome to have that opinion. But the conclusion he has drawn is that, for example, some of today's Messianic Jewish leaders are not, in fact, Messianic Jews, but charismatic Christians who are of Jewish heritage. It would mean, for example, that figures like, well, these Chernoffs are deceased, but David and Joel Chernoff or Paul Lieberman, for example, they are not Messianic Jews. They are charismatic Christians of Jewish ethnicity. What it would mean is that figures like the Chernoffs, the Liebermans, Larry Feldman was the main host of that conference. Jeff Foreman, the president of the MJA, was there. I know all these people. And many others are not Messianic Jews, even though they identify as Messianic Jews. They helped oversee the transition, some of them did, from Hebrew Christian in the late 60s, early 70s to Messianic Jewish, and they have experienced dismissal by the Jewish community for identifying as Messianic Jews. The conclusion by Caleb Hegg is that they are really charismatic Christians of Jewish heritage. They're not Messianic Jews, even though they help see the transition, Hebrew Christian, Messianic Jews. Some of them have, for example, I know one of them had a Messianic Jewish congregation, and right next to it, anti-missionaries came in and established a presence. Well, they're not Messianic Jews if they're really just charismatic Christians with Jewish outreach. That is a conclusion which is going to infuriate so many people. It's going to anger so many people. I am infuriated by it. Now, of course, he could have said, they're not my style of Messianic Jews. He could have said that, because I think Hegg probably expected a conservadox style of Torah, whereas he witnessed more of a reformative style. And of course, ironically, without the pioneering activity of Messianic Judaism represented by these people, among others, and these are books I recommend people read in my local congregation's new members class. Without their pioneering work, there could never be a one law or one Torah submovement. It could never exist. So some of that is just being disrespectful to those who preceded you. Now, it doesn't get emphasized enough sometimes. A majority of Messianic Jewish believers, they come from a Reformed Jewish background. They do not come from, I mean, you will see some from time, they don't come from a conservative, and they certainly don't come from an Orthodox background. All of my close Messianic Jewish friends, guess what? They were raised Reformed, so they grew up eating bacon, or at least bacon out in the world. They were Reformed. Most of them were secular. Some of them were agnostic. A few of them were borderline atheist. And so, for example, when you're witnessing to a lot of their family members now, rather than have to sort through Isaiah 53 as Yeshua, the suffering servant, you more likely have to deal with questions of, is there a God? Okay. Why does God let bad things happen to good people? One of my really good Messianic Jewish friends dealing with her father. They came to America in the early 1980s from St. Petersburg. Leningrad was like, I am Soviet atheist, right? And in order to see him be open to the good news, we had to deal more with basic questions of God, the universe, bad things to good people, some of this. So, but even though a lot of them came from Reformed backgrounds, God brought them to himself, brought them to know Yeshua as the Jewish Messiah. But unlike a lot of people in one law, one Torah, to them, their salvation, their redemption in Yeshua is the most important thing. Doing outward things of Torah, great, and they're very welcoming of families like mine, joining with them and remembering Shabbat or the festivals with them. I think there's something lost when non-Jewish believers take on some of these outward things and they don't do it in fellowship with Messianic Jewish believers. And because Yeshua is the most important thing, they don't feel that their Jewish heritage is infringed upon. Now, this is my experience. Others' experience might be different. You have a one law person go in guns blazing, expecting, this or that. Instead, let me get to know you. Let me get to hear your family story. Our family does things so differently than one law. Sometimes it's not even funny. You go in non-threatening, trying to get to know people, develop relationships, and it can take years at sometimes. They don't feel threatened. But if you go in guns blazing like a lot of one law people do, but I think Caleb Haig expected conservadox. He didn't expect reformative. And if he's only going to go to one event, I mean, I've been to dozens of events. It is true that, and an MJAA especially, they do stress that non-Jewish believers have to be specially called, meaning summoned by God into the Messianic movement. As many non-Jewish believers have come into the Messianic community, they've taken a look at things like Shabbat or the appointed times. Many of them don't last 3 years. There's something about the Messianic experience that may rub them the wrong way. And that is to be determined on a case-by-case basis. And they don't stay. And then they go on. And a lot of that emphasis on being specially called is they want to make sure that if you're specially called like Ruth, it's not just a matter of your God will be my God and your people my people, but where I am buried, you will be buried. So it's a matter of, throughout many centuries of Jewish history, how many of the Gentile powers have promised, we'll be more tolerant, we'll give you more rights. How many promises have been made, and the Jewish community, excuse me, has been betrayed. And I know that some of that you have to be specially called by the Lord is a matter of protection. Now in terms of non-Jewish believers doing outward things of Torah and wanting to do it in a manner sensitive to the needs of Messianic Jews, I have consistently said, going back to even before we moved back out here 13 years ago, that it needs to be a part of one's continual growth in holiness. This is my Wesleyan theological heritage talking. The new covenant, supernaturally transcribing God's commandments onto a new heart and a new mind. The prophecies of the nation streaming to Zion in the end times. If it is not a part of one's growing in holiness and the Holy Spirit saying, I want you to take a look at this. This isn't, something like the Sabbath is an inclusive institution. In ancient Israel, the sojourner was to have a Sabbath rest. And what does this mean to you? And if these people are supernaturally prompted by the Lord to, I think this is serious, and they're able to find a Messianic community, congregation, or synagogue, which is inclusive, they're very blessed. And that model of supernatural compulsion, the Holy Spirit prompting people to do it, they're growing in outward holiness. Hopefully they're growing in inward holiness as well. That is a far better alternative than one law saying, you have to do this. You should be doing this. Otherwise, you're going to be cut off. No, we're not going to be cut off if we have true salvation in Yeshua. As we grow in holiness, as we grow in God's grace and mercy, and we're being sanctified inwardly as well as outwardly, it helps us to avoid the pitfalls of a lot of that style of legalism and rigidity and judgmentalism. So I have consistently said a Messianic lifestyle, if God is prompting you to, if he's supernaturally summoning you into the Messianic movement, and only he knows the circumstances of your life, only he knows when that part is ideal. A lot of people in one law, one Torah, they're Calvinists. So only he knows when you are predestined, as it were, for you to enter into this, right? It has to be a part of your growth in holiness. Otherwise, you're more likely to see it as a rancid work of the flesh, because you're not going to be able to balance doing outward things with inward morality, ethics, love for God, love for neighbor. And you might be doing a lot of outward things, but if it's not a work of the Holy Spirit, you're not going to be able to counterbalance that with God's grace and God's mercy. You're going to very quickly put words of condemnation or judgment onto other people, which, by the way, in my opinion, that's exactly what Caleb Haig did with some of his comments about saying that the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America was not Messianic Jewish, because he saw some people with a more of a Torah light approach. Okay, I do believe, and I've said this, our family has said this for many years, that non-Jewish believers doing various outward matters of Torah should be in some kind of community with Messianic Jewish believers. Okay, and I'm blessed to have several, really good Messianic Jewish friends. And we talk about different issues. And what's really important about being in community with Messianic Jewish believers is not only do you get to learn from them and their family's experience and their life story and what have you, and their pitfalls in coming to faith in Yeshua and having to sort through who they are as a completed Jew in him, but it also absolutely ties you and locks you to matters of what? Israel, the Jewish community. Now, of course, we're having to sort through post October the 7th, 2023. How many people in one law, one Torah are discussing that? How are those apples for you, right? Crickets. Almost none are talking about that. And, it locks you to matters of the end times. What's going on right now in the Middle East? So it's very, very important. And yeah, a lot of non-Jewish people, they don't make it, especially now with rising anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. It's not as convenient to be associated with labels like Messianic or Jewish or Israel or what have you. Do I have moments? Have I had moments in my time in the Messianic Jewish community being treated as second class? Because I'm not Jewish. Do we have distant Jewish ancestry? Yes, we've got a family crest from France 400 years ago that's got 3 solid stars of David on it. And our good friend, Mark Chernizer, a number of years ago, came into my stepfather's study and saw this and was like, whoa, this is one of the most Jewish things I've ever seen. Okay. And he, like a lot of Messianic Jews, know that they're not Jewish believers. In Messianic Judaism, as we approach return of Yeshua, some ancient ancestry is reasserting itself. And yeah, there might be a significant element of why our family has been assigned to this movement because of that, among other factors. But sure, there are going to be moments I get treated as second class. But I'll tell you this, I would have some of those same moments, probably third class moments, in a one law, one Torah setting. Because guess what? I'm college educated. I went to a 4-year university. I'm seminary educated, and I finished my time there. I'm 45 years old, and I'm single. We don't know how that happened. You either, if you can't find the right woman, you don't get married. And I'm also 6'6". So guess what? I've been having to navigate certain things which have seen me treated as second class or put off to the side my entire life, and certainly my entire professional career. And that's just life on earth. You learn how to outmaneuver it. You learn how to outflank some of these things. And you learn how to forgive and give people a wide berth in some cases. You're going to go to a large conference level event. There are going to be some things who you don't like, and you just ignore it. There are going to be some people at a Messianic conference event you're really excited to see, and it's great. Other people you're not so sure about, and some people you just don't interact with and you avoid. That can happen at just about any venue. You can go to your local congregation this weekend, and there are going to be people you're really excited to see. Some people, they're your acquaintances. Other people you avoid. That's life. And sure, in your Messianic experience, you better progress beyond just partaking of the richness and the blessings of things like Shabbat or the appointed times or the festivals. For our family, and you've definitely seen this over the past few years, and you see it now with Messianic Insider going 5 times a week. One of the major reasons why we're here is to help provide stability as we get closer and closer to the Lord's return. We are here, as I am here, to help with whatever is going to happen in the end times. Okay, I can tell you that is something the Lord has supernaturally impressed upon me. And sure, there are some areas of theology, doctrine, practice, which in evangelicalism, would merit some people saying, "Hey, I'm not attending this church, or I'm not going to be part of this group anymore. I'm going to some other church, some other group." Lord said, "You got to park it." There's a greater need here for stability in the end times, because there are things which are going to come down the pike, which many are unprepared for. Now, Caleb Hegg, in his discussion on defined Messianic Judaism, talks about how he believes there probably needs to be a one law group, probably some kind of denomination emerge. We'll see what happens. Obviously, if there is one, we're not going to be a part of it. And I think it's very fair to say, as we enter into the future, you're not going to see one law leaders, one law teachers, John McKee, get closer and closer. You're going to see us get further and further apart. And I'm somebody who's going to emphasize common faith first. And I've said, I've benefited from some one law perspectives in the past, certainly more than some evangelical perspectives on parts of Romans and Galatians and Hebrews. So I confess that. But we're going to get further and further and further apart, especially with what is occurring like right now in the Middle East. I've reached a point in my own ministry and my life. I am far less interested in Torah minutia, how people are doing this, how people are doing that. And I've seen way too many people who stridently identify as one law, one Torah. They condemn other people rather than like, hey, I need to get to know them a little more before I come to some kind of a conclusion. I'm far less interested in Torah minutia than I'm interested in current events, what's happening in the world, our changing times, the growing apostasy, cosmic questions, and how I can contribute to the Romans 11:26, all Israel will be saved trajectory of history. So that's kind of my response to looking through Caleb Hegg's Define Messianic Judaism. You all can come to your own conclusions. Just because someone is not very positive toward one Torah, one law theology, doesn't mean we're telling non-Jewish believers to go get lost. But and actually, the most I've ever seen in a congregational setting is, my Messianic Jewish congregation, Rabbi David Schiller, he welcomes non-Jews to come. He is very excited when he sees non-Jewish believers embrace Shabbat or the festivals and participates in Messianic Jewish life. And he knows, our local congregation gets a lot of one law people. His issue is not with them participating in outward things of Torah. His issue, and my issue as well, is with a lot of the bad attitudes and the pride and the condemnation and the self-righteousness and the judgment. That is what so many are concerned about. And that's why I had the falling out I had more than anything else back around 2010 with Caleb's father, Tim Hegg. And it's like, you never did hardly anything to prevent people condemning others because they didn't reach your high standard. And to be honest, what did Caleb Hegg do after attending Southwestern Regional MJAA? If you wanted to say they're Torah light and they're not my style of Messianic Jews, okay, I understand that. A lot of people will say that about groups. They're not my style of Christian. They're not style of my American. They're not my style of Texan, right? But he didn't do that. He said that he didn't believe that the Messianic Jewish Alliance of America, which formally did in the early 1970s transition from the Hebrew Christian Alliance of America, and that was fought very hard. That today's MJAA Messianic Jews, they're not Messianic Jews. They are charismatic Christians of Jewish ancestry with Jewish evangelistic outreach. That's going to make him, that's going to make him a lot of enemies. And we'll just see what happens. But some of y'all wanted some of my thoughts. I'm sorry I was not able to keep this to 10 minutes, but this is something very important because We are now in the year 2026. We are now in the mid to late 2020s. And, once we conclude this One Law, One Torah series, we'll get into some other series, probably the nation streaming to Zion in the end times. Some of you all have asked me to talk about the terminology under the law. We'll address some of that. And, we'll break it up from these different articles we've got. But to be honest, I'm far more interested about when we are. I'm far more interested today about, where is the Gerald R. Ford strike group than I am about, well, there were some Messianic Jews who might have eaten some unkosher stuff at a conference. If they're from a Reform background, I'm not surprised. But my faith doesn't rise or fall on some of this. Some people, their faith rises or falls on some of this, and they're unable to see some of the bigger picture. So I hope this was instructive. I hope this was helpful. Again, if you don't know about the MJA, which I'm a part of, get books like this, Born a Jew, Die a Jew, by Johanna Chernoff. These two by Paul Lieberman. Don't call me a Christian, call me Messianic. And I'm going to stop with this. When I had to submit my paperwork to go through the process of ordination with the IMCS as a Messianic teacher, do you know who sponsored me? It was Joel Chernoff, it was Paul Lieberman, and it was Joel Lieberman. And to hear that somebody out there in One Law doesn't consider people like that to be Messianic Jews, I mean, that is unspeakably offensive. Now, if you want to say they're not my style of Messianic Jews, okay. I mean, there are a lot of people, I'm not their style of teacher. I'm not their style of spiritual leader. I'm not their style of researcher. Okay, I get that. But to say that people who have been in the trenches fighting for Messianic Judaism, for Messianic Jewish believers, who knows what kind of threats they get, constantly now. What a world we live in. So anyway, tomorrow, as I said, we're going to be picking up in this series, the One Law series. We're going to be addressing some of the specifics of ger and proselutos, because in the Septuagint, in some of the passages we've addressed, the Hebrew ger, sojourner, is rendered as proselutos. So does that mean a proselyte, or did proselutos possibly have an earlier usage meaning just a sojourner? So we're going to get into that, and it'll be a little technical. My goodness, we've almost gone 2 hours, but obviously some information needed to get out there. As always, on behalf of Messianic Apologetics, I would like to sincerely thank you for your ongoing prayers, encouragement, and support for all of our ministry efforts. Please do consider signing up for a monthly $25 or $50 donation. Your resources will go a very long way. If you have not, be sure to visit my website, messianicapologetics.net. There you can access a wide array of articles, frequently asked questions entries. You can look into some back episodes of Messianic Insider, back issues of Outreach Israel News, the monthly newsletter, different McKee moment shorts, etc. You can take a look at our ministry adventures over the years. If you have not, please be sure to give this episode a thumbs up or a heart. It'll definitely help our exposure on social media. We will see you again tomorrow with another episode of Messianic Insider. Until then, may God bless you, shalom, and take care.